Being conducted remotely via Zoom webinar per our remote participation policy, BEDJA. 9 members are in attendance via Zoom. Well, 9 members are about to be in attendance via Zoom because Amy will be joining us. But Evelyn Abaya Isa, Diane Baum, Kira Cook, Adam Klein, John Peterson, Angie So, Yevon Wang, myself, and Amy Krishnamurthy, I think, will be joining us shortly. All right, in an ongoing effort to make our meeting as secure as possible, we asked members of the public last week to view the meeting using ActonTV's YouTube channel found at the top of the agenda. Those who wish to comment during the meeting were asked to register 24 hours prior to the start of the meeting using the link that was found also at the top of the agenda. We know now that that didn't really happen or work out, and because we couldn't have the meeting last Thursday, I apologize. So if there are people that are watching on YouTube that would like to participate in the next meeting next Thursday, we would ask them to use the link, I imagine, that is at the top of that agenda to register 24 hours prior to the start of the meeting. And the only reason that you would need to do that is if you would like to have the opportunity to participate in live public participation or to comment or question during any of the agenda items. Otherwise, it's just our business meeting held in public that you can view on YouTube. This meeting is also being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. Per our remote policy, all votes will be done by roll call. I'll call each member's name and they will state how they vote. Thank you for joining us. Welcome everybody to the first of 2 meetings this week. Sorry for the extra meeting time. Everyone was frustrated by our inability to hold the meeting last Thursday, which unfortunately makes us have 2 meetings this week because of the complication of February vacation and the timing with which we need to pass, to have a vote on, not pass, when we need to have a vote on the initial budget. And that is required because of the timing of Boxborough's town meeting and when we need to get everything done. So because we voted to suspend the public participation policy at our last meeting, we are required to review that suspension at the next meeting to confirm whether or not it should stay suspended. So I think that we are continuing the suspension of the policy this week because there was some confusion around how people could participate, and I know not everybody had the same ability. Am I correct, Peter, in assuming that? You're muted.
Correct.
Okay. So is there consensus from the committee that we continue the suspension of this policy? I don't think we have to vote. We just have to nod. Yes? Okay. All right. There will be a revised public participation process basically for the next meeting, although if there is, I think only, well, if actually, there are people that did actually register to attend this meeting. So with that, if there is anyone that wants to participate publicly and make a statement now at the beginning, are the same rules. If you had already registered, will count tonight, so to speak. So if anyone that is a panelist who did register for this meeting would like to make a statement during public participation, I'll allow you to do that now. Just need to raise your hand.
So again, similar to what we've done in previous meetings, if you are an attendee in the Zoom meeting and you'd like to speak, if you would raise your hand, please, that would be great.
And if not, which I don't see anybody, I know that Adam has some comments that came into the school committee address that we had set up for public comment that he will read. You are muted.
Is it my turn now?
It is your turn now.
Okay. Here's the first one that came in. To the members of the Acton Boxborough School Committee, thank you for the challenging work you do day in and day out for the benefit of the children of Acton and Boxborough. It is unfortunate you experience pressure and intimidation from some within our community who disagree with your thinking and decision making. To disagree respectfully is fine. To harass is not. Please know that the opinions and sentiments of the minority, although loud, do not represent the views of the majority. Keep up the good work. Respectfully yours, Bridget and Anthony Chambaras. The second one that came in, hello. To all the school committee members, thank you for your tireless and often underappreciated work that you do for the schools in Acton and Boxborough. I am sorry that you have experienced harassment regarding the retiring of the colonial mascot, both at the meetings and in between and week after week. I appreciate the work that you are doing to improve the AB community and ensure that all feel welcome and included. Please know that the comments of a few do not reflect the opinions of many. Sincerely, Carol Schittle. And the third message that came in. Dear school committee members, I want to thank you for your leadership during a most turbulent time. I grew up in Scarborough, Maine, and played sports for teams known as the Scarborough Redskins. The teams are now known as the Red Storm after difficult wrestling with tradition, honor, and cultural disrespect. What you are leading our communities through is most difficult. That I know. I'm sorry you're having to endure harassment during and in between school committee meetings over this matter. The individuals responsible should be held to account. I hope the students and community can finalize their choice of a mascot in the near future and we can all move forward respectfully. Thank you for your leadership, Kelly Signes. And that is it.
Thanks, Adam.
Yep.
I have been informed that our student rep will be attending the next meeting to give us an update. And so then the next thing on the agenda is Peter's date.
Okay, great. So in order to keep the agenda moving tonight and really focus on the budget discussions, I will just give a few brief updates. One, we are welcoming 3 high school principal finalists tomorrow night to a community Zoom meeting. So, for school committee members who'd like to attend, I think we sent you that link, but that is also on our website. And, we will moderate the questions and answers, but we will have each of our candidates coming and they'll be talking for about 5 minutes and taking questions for about 25 minutes, roughly. We have 3 candidates over an hour and a half, so we'll hold very strictly to the half-hour time frame. I have been in the process of checking references since last week when candidates visited, so that process is nearly complete now. We will give our families probably about a day to provide feedback on each of the candidates to me, and then I will make a selection. Likely, hopefully be able to announce that by the end of this week. So we are closing in quickly on the end of that, and it would be a nice way to head into February vacation, knowing who the next principal of the high school will be. Special education director search. We conducted an initial round of interviews. We have decided to extend that. We had NESDEC do another mass mailing across the state to administrators everywhere. We also reached out to Boston College, posted there. We posted on LinkedIn as well. We created attempted a social media push to try and get the word out to continue to generate candidates for the pool. So that is something that's in process as well. That posting will close at the end of February vacation, and then the screening committee will reconvene, take a look at any additional applications that have come in, and choose about next steps in the interview process. Pre-K update. Coming out of last meeting, there were a couple of questions about the pre-K programming, where we had wanted to move the early release date for all the elementary schools to Wednesday and have the pre-K program align with that date. What I can tell you is I wanted to confirm this with Joe and Debbie Dixon, and Debbie's here to answer questions if you have them, but there is no change to that one ABA program that we have at the pre-K. So that program actually stays as the full 5-day program that it always has. The ABA services continue on that 5th day. So I just want to make sure we're clear about that. Really the impact is on all of the other pre-kindergarten classes that did not have that 5th day of programming. They're the ones that actually, will be more consistent with the elementary schools. The school building project, we had an exciting update on that. The steel beams have started to go in on the school building project. If you're on the mailing list for that, you saw a few pictures go out, but I will hopefully share some pictures with you in the next few weeks. But I would encourage you to drive by Gates at some point. Probably over the next month or two, it will start to look more and more like a building that you can see. So that's going to be very exciting. And then I want to end with just a nice positive. This week, we are celebrating Lunar New Year. So for those of you that celebrate, Happy New Year. Although I will say we get to have one more school committee meeting before you get to start celebrating. But Lunar New Year is this week, and I just want to point that out for everyone. Happy to take any questions on that update.
Angie, you have your hand raised?
Yes.
Go
Thank you.
ahead.
Okay. Peter, can you just clarify, after tomorrow's interview that parents join, what is the process for them to provide any kind of feedback?
Marie, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. We have a form that we will share with the community that has an opportunity to give feedback about all three candidates that we will send out ahead of time, have available in the chat that night, and ask people to respond by the end of the day, Wednesday.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Angie.
I don't think I see any other questions. Right?
I don't think so.
All right. Thanks. So we have one presentation tonight. Tonight we have Jessica Harms and 3 students here to visit us from the National Honor Society of Theater. And Jessica, if you are ready, you can introduce yourself and the reason you are joining us.
All right, I believe I am actually playing a video first, and then we will, I think at that point, Jess, Haley, and Sabina will probably turn their videos on. So let me share my screen. There we go. And if you cannot see the video when I start, please let me know, and we will fix that.
We, the student leaders of Proscenium Circus Student Theater at ABRHS, are incredibly grateful for the school committee's continued support of theater in our community.
Thanks to your support, we were honored as a national leader last year, being one of 2 schools to be chosen as a Disney pilot school. We piloted the Disney productions of Twice Charmed and Freaky Friday. Thank you for helping over 120 students participate in this project and grow confidence in their skills. Also, getting a college-level training in a high school theater production has given me personally the confidence to pursue theater professionally.
Last year, PC earned the state championship for Best Production for A Matter of Life and Death. This win marked the 5th year in a row PC has won the state championship, and we have qualified to compete at the international level. Your support has enabled us to travel with the largest team in the state, and nothing compares to that experience. Personally, it's taught me how to innovate, adapt, and meet challenges as a team, and how to be a proper leader. These skills are what I need to be successful beyond high school, so thank you for supporting my future.
Because we have multiple theater classes, which allows us to slow down and really hone in on our craft, I achieved to be one of 3 students to be awarded a state scholarship for theatrical excellence. Thank you for allowing your students to not only develop and grow as people, but as artists while they're in school. I don't know who I'd be without this theater program today.
When quarantine began, theater remained a constant as our lifeline of community support and routine. We hosted trivia nights, we brought in special guest artists to teach us advanced skills, and we are now one of only 2 schools in the state to produce a musical this year. It took over 75 students 6 months to produce our musical, Worcester Academy. We are very excited to be debuting our musical this weekend and offer free streaming passes at avdrama.org.
This summer, 30 of us learned how to write and compose music for our own full-length musical. We had never heard of another school writing their own musical, especially not one to be performed virtually. But now, we have 4 other schools who are going to be performing the show that we wrote. Writing this musical has given us a voice in a time where we felt like we've had none. Our musical is about the pain we experience when you put your own self-worth into tests and grades, and to expose that pain in a community that accepts you is freeing. Thank you for supporting a safe community where we are free to voice our opinions.
This fall, we rehearsed our musical in the sun, snow, and rain up until Thanksgiving break, and we thank you for letting us use the tennis courts as our stage. Because we were able to have in-person rehearsals, we were able to continue upholding PC's goals of collaboration and community while also providing a safe space and sense of normalcy. Personally, Having a reminder that there will always be a home for you was especially impactful and needed during these isolating times. And while our scripts might have gotten wet, PC has proven to me again and again that tribulations only make us stronger, as a program, as individuals, and as a community. We thank you for supporting us in the continuation of that message throughout this unprecedented fall season.
We aim to use our art as a tool to inspire conversation and promote empathy. So this year we produced Act Free, an anti-racism play about Juneteenth. I'm so grateful that this play gave me the opportunity to research parts of our country's history, which have too often been sidelined. Act Free allowed me to ground my own understanding of racial justice in this country, and more importantly, how much further we have to go. Thank you for promoting the representation of all voices in our community, and for giving us a voice to begin to dismantle systemic racism.
We also aim to give back and connect to our community. So, our acting class is performing readings of children's books to celebrate the diversity in our community, and we've created a playlist on YouTube for any elementary student to access.
Additionally, we are continuing to plan some fun spring activities to bring our PC community together. Presenting circus has truly defined my high school experience, and while I've gained amazing and valuable skills like leadership, teamwork, and confidence, when looking back as a senior, it's the community that's the real reason I'm glad I did PC. Whether it's our student community or the community we bring together with shows, PC is a place of belonging and inclusion, and one that I will value far into my future. Thank you for the support that has made all of this possible.
Hello, school committee. I am honored to be here this evening to express my gratitude for all the time and energy you give to our community. I am Jess Harms, she, her, hers, the theater teacher at ABRHS, and I am happy to introduce student leaders Hallie and Sabina.
Hi everyone, I'm Hallie. So I am president of Presenting Circus at the high school, and yeah, we said it in the video, but we just wanted to say thank you so much for the support that you've given our program, and yeah, just been able to allow us to continue through this unprecedented pandemic.
Seconding everything that they all said, thank you all so much. It means a lot to have a safe space in a home during this quarantine. And I'm Sabina. I was the head choreographer for the past fall musical, and I'm also on the PC board.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for making that video. It was really enlightening. I think a lot of information that people didn't know that was going on if they didn't have students involved in PC. And I think it's really wonderful to see what you all have been up to and how creative you've been able to be in the pandemic and still being able to continue your craft and your art. Did anyone on the committee want to say something? Amy?
I just wanted to say I am so incredibly proud of all of these students. I mean, the stuff that Jess Harms does with the kids, they're so eloquent and adventurous and creative. It's just a real, I'm just really proud of our community, and I thank you so much for doing this.
Adam?
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys for a wonderful show this weekend. I enjoyed it thoroughly when I was watching it. And I just wanted to say that in one of my previous careers, I was a college professor for technical theater at Ithaca College. And we had some AB alum come through the program there. And it's clearly evident that the quality of our program remains at the highest level. And so I'm so happy to be part of this community and to be someone who has a background in the arts and to be able to support the amazing arts program and theater program that we have here. So thank you guys.
Kira?
I just want to say as a mom with elementary school kids that I first of all, I'm ever impressed with ABRHS students. Y'all are just the most poised and powerful young people I've ever experienced. I'm just so proud to experience this. And when I watched this video, I just dreamed of my two little boys being part of this program. It was just so inspiring to me. So just thank you so much for being leaders and for being inspirational and for being young and creative and amazing. And as a writer, I so appreciate that this is a community that loves the arts and encourages y'all to be who you are. So congratulations on everything that you've achieved.
And I'll just say thank you again for taking the time to come to our meeting. I'm sorry it couldn't happen last Thursday. I know your video was produced so that we would have all known, but that you were presenting your show last weekend. I don't want people to be confused because you were supposed to present at our meeting last Thursday, but it was a wonderful show, and I'm just pleased that you guys were able to take the time out to come tonight and thank us. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you for all that you do. We have received a lot of really great public feedback. So we are going to be extending the run of our show through this weekend for folks who were unable to miss it, because our whole aim with the program is to bring our community together. So making it more accessible to our community is our goal.
Well, that's great news. Thank you for the update. And where would people go if they wanted to get tickets and they missed it the first weekend?
Yeah, if you go to abdrama.org, it'll be on the website there, and it'll be on demand for you to play through this weekend, and then it'll come down.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion in a separate vote. I will read each item name, and if any member would like it held, please say hold. Approval of meeting minutes of 1/21/21. Recommendation to approve gift of $2,063.06 from Life Touch National School Studios to the R.J. Gray Junior High School for student activities. Great. All right, then I will entertain a motion.
So moved that to accept both of these. I hope that worked.
Sure.
Second.
All right, and we'll do a roll call vote. Kira? Sorry.
Yes, with gratitude.
You're in the top corner of my screen, so you get to go first. Amy?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Great, thank you, everyone. All right, just a note about the order in which all of these next couple of things appear on the agenda. After meeting at Budget Subcommittee last week, we had sort of a lengthy discussion about how to best approach the budget so that you would understand what was being asked at the end of the day. And so there's a lot of dense information that was included in your packet and a lot of information that is pertinent to understanding why the budget is how the budget is. But in order to best understand what Peter and Dave and the rest of the administration need from us tonight, we're presenting it in this order. So just keep that in mind. I think Peter's going to be very clear about what the ask is tonight so that everyone will really understand how you should process that information. So Peter or Dave or whichever one of you is going first.
Yeah. Dave, do you want to give a quick verbal second quarter report? And this is not the full, we can send you the materials for the full second quarter report, but we wanted to give you a very high level perspective at this meeting.
Dave, you're muted. We can't hear you.
I keep muting myself when I think I'm doing the reverse. That's a problem. I think you got the materials, which consist of a one-page overview, a one-page revenue summary, and a multi-page expenditure summary. I think you got all that. So I'm just going to very quickly talk about the overview. And so this is where we think we're going to be at year end right now, or through the second quarter of actual transactions. We're looking at a revenue deficit this year that's comprised of a couple of pieces. One is the state aid, and the second big piece is our local revenues, Medicaid and investment earnings. We'll talk more about that as the year unfolds, and hopefully the news will be better. But as of right now, we're looking at a revenue deficit, but we're looking at a budget surplus more than offsetting the revenue deficit. And we've, again, in the material, we've talked about some of the main pieces of what we're projecting now, again, through 6 months of activity. So this is typically when I first give you a projection for year end. And so what we're saying now is at year end, we're looking at about a $362,000 surplus, net of expenditure surplus and revenue deficit. I will say that typically I inject conservatism at this point. I'd rather, as the saying goes, underestimate and overperform. And I expect the numbers will get better, as they usually do as the year goes on. But that's the current snapshot. And the overview also, just for your information, has where we stand as far as E&D. We used $1,145,000 to pass this year's budget, and certified E&D came in at 3.4 million, or a little over 3.5%. It was extremely late. It only came in last month. So that, in very broad strokes, is an overview of where we stand through 2 quarters.
Dave, can I just, a couple of things for clarifying. So Dave always says he's conservative. So right now you're projecting about what for the end of the year?
362,000 to the good.
Okay. Last year at this time, what were we projecting?
Last year at this time, which, understand, was on the eve of the pandemic, we were showing about $600,000 in the hole. It was primarily a salary of a personnel deficit, and primarily through what happened as a result of financial activity during the pandemic, that just changed 180 degrees. We likely won't have the same flip this year, but we're starting from a more solid position, as Peter's intending to get me to remind you.
What did we end up turning back last year, Dave, at the end of the year?
I think it was about 800,000 net.
Okay. So Dave loves to be conservative, and Marie and I always like to give him a hard time at this time of year. So, traditionally we are projecting some kind of a deficit at this point of the year. Right now we're a little bit to the good. So, we're moderately optimistic. As Dave said, I don't think we're going to see the kind of swing we saw last year, because we're not going to all of a sudden cease operations for an extended period of time. That's not in our forecast. But I think, we have reason to have some optimism around turnbacks this year. So that's really the broad picture. Tessa, I don't know if you want to pause now for any second quarter questions, or if you want us to continue through.
It's up to you. I don't care.
If there are questions, I would suggest ask the questions about the FY21, because we're going to pivot to FY22 budget.
Okay. So Amy, and then John.
I don't have a question. I just think that Peter needs to knock on wood right now, because you can't say we're definitely not going to be, all shutting down operations. You're jinxing us.
Okay, John.
Dave, I just wanted to be clear with respect to the $500,000 contingency. So when you project the 362, is that 362 plus the 500, or is that 362 working its way back to the 500?
No, that's an excellent point that's missed in looking at the overview, which yours truly did miss it, because it's not singled out there. So when I say we're projecting a budget variance of 600 and change to the good, that includes $500,000 of contingency appropriation for which we're expecting to not spend any of it. So we're 125 to the good plus 500 to the good of contingency. Now, with that said, it's masking a little bit because the contingency is part of the budget. So we have the ability to spend that money, but just on a single line item basis, yeah, there's a $500,000 line item that we're expecting to underrun by $500,000.
Dave, I see some confusion. Can you what's the total projected variance right now?
Total projected variance.
362.
So their revenue projected variance of negative 263, expenditure projected variance of positive 625. You add a negative and a positive, and you get a net positive 362.
Okay, and then the 500,000.
No, 362 is built into 500 is built into the 362. And that is clear if you look at the 7 pages of detail for the expenditures. Budget subtotal is $124,000 to the good, or about 0.1% of the budget. And then the very next line after that, I'm talking on the last page of the detailed expenditure report that I think went out. Total contingency, budget 500, projected year-end balance 500. That means we didn't spend any of it, and it all dropped to surplus.
Okay, my apologies. I thought I heard you say something different before, so.
So I'm just going to note that it's hard to listen to all those numbers when you're not sharing your screen with the thing that was in the packet, which is fine. But I know what you're talking about because I've already looked at that sheet like 18 times because of budget sub. But for those who haven't, I think we're showing a little bit of confusion about what you're talking about, especially because
would it help to bring up the screen for 1 minute? Beth, do you have it handy, or does someone want to give me a?
I can share it, and it looks like I have permission to share, so I will gladly bring it up. Just make sure I've got the right thing here.
Thank you, Adam.
So if you got, actually, if you just stay at where you entered, we'll just get this piece out of the way. Keep going down to the bottom. So as you see, the budget subtotal is all the other line items, all the other admin cost centers, and we're projecting to be 125,000 to the good at year end. That's as of now projecting at year end. The amount just below that is that we're expecting to not need to spend any of the contingency, which follows if we're to the good on all the other line items, we need not spend any of the contingency. So that's where the 624 comes from. And there are several pieces in that report that we've projected out to year end, and we don't need to belabor this and go through them now. But if you scroll up to the first page of this presentation, that's the one. Mm-hmm. Here's what I tried confusingly to say in words, and pictures are worth, how many words. 262,000 deficit in revenues, 624,000 surplus in expenditures. I just gave you the breakdown of that, which includes the contingency, and the net is 362 to the good, projected at year end. That's not the year to date surplus. That's projected as of the end of the fiscal year.
And so,
sorry, Tessa, this would have been much.
So just for additional clarity, because of the question that John asked, if the 500,000 wasn't baked into the expenditure total there, we would still be at a negative right now.
Correct. 362 minus 500 would be about 130 negative projection. And then going back to what Peter said, we were much further in the hole this time last year. So we do expect things to turn around. There's a revenue component that is going to turn around. These things come in and reports are produced and distributed, and then new information comes in, and it's just not practicable to redo reports, but we'll update them. We'll update them in the next go around.
No, that's fine. I just want to make sure everyone really understood what it was you were talking about. And now that you showed it, it was much clearer.
Yes.
Does anyone have a question about that before we keep going? Diane?
Yeah, before we leave FY21, I just wondered, Dave, if you would comment on any expected COVID relief from the federal government.
You mean further than what we've received already? So there are two pieces that have come in. One relates to FY21, and that's what I had just alluded to, that information about that came in after these reports were prepared. That's a fairly small amount of money, but it's going to make up for the minimum aid that we did not get with this year's budget, which causes the Chapter 70 aid variance in the revenue report. That's about $160,000 and change. The second one that we know of is called ESSER 2. We got the ESSER grant last year. It's a Title I based allocation. And so to the extent that Acton Boxborough does not have a tremendously high low-income population relative to other communities, our take is relatively small compared to other communities. $25, no, this is $460,000, which can be spent over a 3-year period of time. Those are the two we know about. Neither of those, importantly, includes anything that's currently on the agenda of the federal government, the $1.9 trillion that the president is proposing and meeting with some positive and some not so positive reception in the legislative branches. What seems to be on the horizon is that action is expected to take place fairly quickly. So we should know fairly soon a couple of things. One, what's in it from the federal government. 2, how much of that flows to Massachusetts. 3, how much of that flows to individual districts. And very importantly, 4, how much of that, what are the rules of engagement on use of that money? That's going to be very important when that information is known. That's all I know about it. I don't have any speculation on numbers, predictions of numbers and things like that.
Adam?
Yeah, I just want to add, Diane, to your question. We have received funds for the COVID relief fund, or we've applied for some of that. We've received funds, Dave, for FEMA reimbursement. So there have been some funds that have come into this year's budget to help offset some of the additional expenses of supplies and remote learning program and technology and whatnot.
Yeah, and to be honest, I didn't rehash that because I've given that report before, and there's nothing changed as far as anything tangible. We've not received any more funds ourselves. The 2 announcements both occurred within the last couple of days. We've not heard anything about our FEMA number 2 application yet, which is significant in amount. So there are lots of irons in the fire. Some of them, if for example, we were to get a significant amount of funding from the FEMA grant, that's not going to improve our bottom line because those costs were all accounted for in a FEMA fund. So what the FEMA reimbursement would do would be to preclude those funds from having to be funded via other means, including potentially our operating budget.
All right. Kira?
I'd like to ask a stupid question, if that's okay.
There are no stupid questions, Kira.
Okay, brilliant. So we expressed surprise and delight that we're not in the hole for Q2, but we were in the hole for Q2 this time last year. So I guess what my question is that the normal pattern that Q2 is when we get the numbers with projections that look dire, and then we get to Q3 and it's kind of all okay? Is there a ebb and flow and tide, as it were, to the budget, or is there some other pattern that I'm missing here?
For a stupid question, that's remarkably, superbly enunciated and very, very astute for a stupid question. The couple of things that really are able to be predicted that would have a material impact on the end of the year budget are health insurance projection. We're pretty good with that because health insurance starts earlier in the year. We prepay health insurance. So we have a pretty good bead on that. And that's running a deficit because we hired staff for the RLP who were not budgeted. And so we're running over on our health insurance costs. That's a pretty good number. Special ed tuitions, I don't have anything as far as a year-end projection for that because the jury's still out. In election season, that would be a too early to call. The other big one is personnel, and personnel is the poster child for the numbers always get better from here. Right about now is when we've really gotten our first good projection for the end of the year, and we're showing a significantly positive variance in all of the personnel accounts. That's usually where we start off very slow and get better because things like leaves of absences are not quantified in the way that we do the projection at this point. Some other things that we don't have a good handle on are just carried at budget, and lo and behold, they come in under budget by the end of the year. So there's a high degree of conservatism, especially in the personnel lines. That typically will get better. And so when you look at the detailed expense projections that I've given you, watch for the next iteration to see changes. All right. And my prediction will be health insurance is going to come in about the same. We'll see where we think we're going to be for special education and related tuitions, and look for how the personnel cost projection has gone up and down. Up or down.
See, not a stupid question. Very good question. Yevon?
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, Dave, for the good number. So it's good to see we projected to have some surplus. So I just have some similar question like Kira, actually very preliminary. So you put under the big category, you put a percentage, right? The progress against the budget, basically 47% or 50%. So I understand the different category. Probably we will expect different numbers in terms of a percentage. I don't expect probably 50%, right, by the end of the second quarter. Is that correct?
Yeah, so those numbers are in there. I figure I do them for myself as kind of a sanity check, but since the data are available, I put it in there. And you'll see a lot of the instructional departments, the buildings and whatnot, they tend to hover around 50%, which there's some logic to that. And the fact that they're all in the same range, it provides some comfort when you say, I think I'm okay with these numbers because they're around 50% at this time of year.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So, but some number is really, I mean, I don't know, should I worry about it, or maybe some number is really encouraging, right? We only spend 27% like people services, and for some others we spend already 50, 65 or 80 something, 80%. So if that's so I just wonder if it's possible, say, have some guidelines. Say, by first quarter, we expect that this category we will spend 25%. By the end of the second quarter, we expect that this number is going to be say 80%. Nobody, I mean, by looking at some number like 89, right? I understand that's information technology. It bothers me, right? So for this, I just wonder from the just very high level, is that from the like FY20 at the end of second quarter, do we expect this 89 number also?
Can I jump in on that one? Yeah, but I don't think at this point of the year the percentages are necessarily all that helpful. Sometimes like something like instructional technology, you're going to see a lot of that purchased very early in the school year because we need to have all of that equipment in place. Similar, a lot of times building-based supplies, you would see purchased earlier in the school year so that those materials are in place. Other times it has to be spread out because you can't store, 25 pallets of paper at any place in the school. So, there's no great trend that we can tell you toward that, other than to say, take the percentages a little bit with a grain of salt right now. We do tend to spend a lot of our funds up front just because of the nature of schooling and needing to have things in kids' hands early in the year.
So I'll just try and in 30 seconds give Yevon some assurance here because he's pointed out some information that's on here and probably deserves a little bit of my brain for a couple of things. So the 89%, it's as Peter said, we front end loaded a lot of the technology hardware, as I think you know, to provide support for the RLP. The finance department at 65%, remember two things. That includes debt service, that includes the Middlesex County retirement payment. The debt service principal has not been made, so that actually that's not a piece of it. But Middlesex County is a $3 million payment that's made on July 1st. That's what skews finance to be more prepaid. 27% pupil services, and you'll see the reason why I'm pointing on these three. Pupil services includes circuit breaker as an offset. So to the extent we have reduced the spending that goes through the appropriation by circuit breaker, and what happens with circuit breaker, we spend what's in the balance as of July 1st first. So all of the money that was in circuit breaker at the end of last year, $2.5 million, is already accounted for. And that's why it looks like we're way underspending pupil services. We're not underspending pupil services by 27% times 2, 54%. We're not underspending pupil services by 46%.
Yeah, those are great explanation. Thank you. I would just say, like Peter said, of course, it's very difficult to offer some guidelines. So for us to look at those numbers, right, to understand that.
So yeah, but this is last year, like this is FY21, and so as we move forward in this process, I really would encourage, especially people who are new, to reach out to Dave offline, not during a meeting, to kind of help understand some of these things, because it is part of the global ask of what is being asked tonight in order to understand these things, but in order to move forward and kind of stay on top of what we need to understand for tonight's meeting, it's a little extra.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Keep moving.
All right.
That's FY21.
I'm going to pull up FY22 here.
Tessa, while Peter's doing that, I'll just point out that MASC is running a training this Wednesday at lunchtime on Chapter 70 funding, and I'd encourage anybody who's got questions about that to attend that training. I'll be there.
Who doesn't even know what Chapter 70 funding is? It would be a great thing to attend, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, so this is our February 4th presentation, which is now the February 8th presentation. I want to acknowledge that we have 2 budget presentations within a week. We have some areas that we really need some strong school committee sense coming out of tonight so that we know what to come back with for our meeting on Thursday. In terms of, giving you kind of a something that you could vote on for a preliminary budget. So, we have some questions that we're hoping for feedback on. It's not intended to limit what you give us feedback about, but we do need some help with the bigger picture here to hone for Thursday.
Is it just my screen, or is that so super pixelated to everybody else? I can't, like, to me, I can't even see any of it.
Wow, mine is fine.
It is? Okay. Then
Yeah.
it's just
Mine's better.
okay. That's
Mine's
fine.
fine.
Okay. I just wanted to ask. I don't know why. The video was before too.
So I'm going to very quickly go through the remaining timeline and where we're at in the process. We'll also give you a very quick overview of what we presented at the last meeting on January 21st, just to refresh everyone's memory. We want some feedback about preliminary budget approach to inform our next steps. And again, that's between now and Thursday that we have to refine this again. We want to review some of our budget changes that we've made since we gave you the last presentation and give you a summary of the recommended budget. And then any additional feedback in anticipation of a preliminary budget vote 3 days from now. So we are right here. The 8th presentation, you have the line item budget. Actually, you do not have the line item budget, correct, Dave?
Yes, they do.
Yes, you do. I'm sorry. Yep. I don't have my packet up. I'm missing a screen here right now. So you have that. The all-day kindergarten tuition vote, you actually voted that last year. You do not need to revote it because you've already set the tuition rate. Unless you decide you want to change it somehow, it's not something we're recommending, but we wanted to leave that there. And the CIP project and funding update, we'll talk briefly about that, but that's not an in-depth presentation tonight. We will have that later in the process. And then February 11th, we come back with the recommended budget version 2, and we'll be looking for a preliminary vote. You can change the budget after the preliminary vote, so keep that in mind, and we'll talk more about that later. Again, coming up on the preliminary vote, and that's a majority vote of members. And so now, just to refresh where we left last meeting, we were essentially looking at a 3.73% budget increase, which is roughly $3.6 million. With that number in that budget increase in place, and this is important this year, the overall assessments go up something around 4.6%. And in Acton, that results in about a 4.4% increase, and in Boxborough, it's just about a 6% increase. So we've been doing some work on our end to get the numbers down. Remember just a few big ideas from the last meeting. We presented a level service budget, so that it, represented a decline in anticipated revenues of about $156,000. We had about a 4% contractual increase in staffing costs. There are no new staff included in that request. There's actually a decrease of 2 FTE. Health insurance is now projected at 7%. It had been at 5% in our initial assumptions. That's been set now at 7% increase. MCRS, Middlesex County Retirement Assessment, 12%. And resuming funding of a capital improvement plan, which is an addition of $345,000. That was another one of the major budget drivers. In the line item preliminary level service budget, the net increase again was $3.6 million, or roughly 3.7%. We did reduce in that budget some of the use of E&D reserve to the tune of about $180,000. There was some partial funding from transportation reserve and capital reserve included in that as well. And then again, I already mentioned it, but the total assessments are at the bottom. So this, I think, is important for the discussion this year, and I wanted to just talk briefly about budget and assessments, that they are not the same. Our budget is all of the combined costs that we pay to operate our schools. Our revenue is the sources of funds that come from the places other than the town. So when we talk about revenue, we talk about the places other than the towns for that money. So state and federal are typically the sources. The reserves are the various savings accounts that we have. And then the assessment is the portion of the budget that the towns are responsible for. One note, circuit breaker is a unique type of reserve because it's applied directly to the budget and decreases our overall budget. So if we choose to use 200,000 additional circuit breaker reserve, that decreases the actual budget by 200,000. The other types of reserves, E&D, transportation, and capital, are actually applied after the budget is set. So they don't reduce the budget, but they do reduce the assessments that the member towns have to pay. All right, for those of you wanting to follow along, the budget is all of our operating costs minus, as I said just on the last screen, minus circuit breaker reserve. And that's our total budget increase. The assessments are the budget increase minus the revenue, minus additional reserves, and that's what gets assessed to the towns. So the total assessments, and then times Acton enrollment is what Acton pays for an assessment, and then the total assessment times the percent Boxborough enrollment is what Boxborough would have to pay. And it's roughly an 85-15 split on the enrollment percentages. So with our numbers put in here, our operating costs plus the reserve circuit breaker use, that was the 3.6 million or 3.73%. This 3.6 million, it's really important to remember that that is on a $97 million budget number. So, that's where we get the 3.73%. To look at the assessments though, the total increase was 3.6 million. The new revenue is negative by 150,000. The additional reserve use is 170,000. So the assessment change would be 3.6 million. However, it's not on 100 million as it was up top. It's now on 77 million because that was the previous assessment. That's why, even though the numbers are roughly the same, 3.6 million and 3.6 million, you're seeing a much higher percentage change there. All right, and then when you go by enrollment, you can see how we get to the various town assessments. So in a year where we have negative revenue growth from state and federal funds, that's why you're seeing that assessment percent go higher. If we had positive revenue growth, and in the last few years, we've actually had substantial positive revenue growth, it's possible to increase a budget, but you actually see that the assessment change is not as high as the actual budget percent change. All right, so we're in a situation we have not seen in a few years.
Peter?
Yep.
Do you think because we're going to go into another direction in the presentation, should you ask if there are questions?
Sure, I'm happy to. Any questions on what we just presented?
Okay.
No, Peter, I'll give you props because that really was a very good explanation and understanding the difference between a budget increase and an assessment.
Sure. Yeah, no, we thought, particularly in this budget, that's really important, especially where, again, typically our assessment percent has been lower than our budget number, and this year it's a higher percentage, and that, I think grabs everyone's attention.
And it's helpful to grasp the math that the budget increase at this point is 3.6 million. The assessment increase is 3.6 million. Oh, wait, that's the same. Well, the revenue and the reserve offset each other. So the budget increase remains the same. So it's coincidental that it's the same amount of dollar increase for the budget and for the assessment. But as Peter said, it's a different denominator, the budget versus the assessment. I agree. This makes it really clear.
All right. So now, recommended budget, a couple of guiding questions, that we've been thinking about. One is meeting our students' post-pandemic educational needs and the balance then of the financial impact of our budget on the community. Those are two big important ideas to think about as we go into this budget. The levers. One thing we have to think about, obviously Acton is at its levy limit, and we're also in kind of just a tough general budget cycle and a tough financial outlook for communities. So if we want to moderate the impact to the town, we have two basic categories of levers. One is to reduce our budget. So the first way typically do that is to reduce expenses. So personnel expenses, capital expenses, other things like materials and supplies, although those are a very, very small part of the budget. Really, it's personnel are the two big chunks, and personnel is by far the largest. The other way to reduce the budget is to increase the use of circuit breaker reserves. So keep in mind, those are the two levers for reducing the budget. The other major lever to moderate the impact to the towns is to increase use of reserves. So the three areas of reserves we talked about were E&D, transportation, and capital reserves. So the two choices we have, reduce the budget or increase use of reserves or some combination thereof. So just a little FYI, some big numbers to point out. What we're going to show you has gotten our budget numbers. The percent increase on the budget is down to 3.17%, which brings the Acton assessment to 3.46 and the Boxborough to 5, just over 5. So we're certainly heading in the right direction. So let's get into some of the details of that. In terms of our first lever and the little blue sticky note there, which was to reduce the budget, we did basically 5 things, and we're going to need some feedback on at least 1 or 2 of these. 1, we reduced the building-based operating expenses by about $100,000. That is based on an anticipated in-person program, and elementary allocations are based on projected enrollments. Right, so that's $100,000. Our principals and we are very comfortable with that reduction, and we're making sure you see what that is. The other area of the budget we reduced were in teaching and learning and facilities, and those are $25,000 each. The FY20 Case Collaborative credit. Case Collaborative, its version of E&D is called cumulative surplus, and that is capped. Just like our E&D is capped at 5%, they have a cap on what they can carry for cumulative surplus. They've been very well managed over the last few years, and they have exceeded their cumulative surplus. We are getting back about $500,000 out of that cumulative surplus. What we're proposing is to use that over a 3-year period. So about 165 of that would be applied toward next year. We believe that's conservative and could carry us through the next several years with a little bit of positive news from Case. ESSER 2, federal relief. We have just about $500,000. Dave could give you probably a more precise number than that. We're proposing to use about $100,000 to reduce some of our tech budget needs and essentially defer those into federal relief instead. And then the last area where we really want to have a discussion tonight when it comes time is a proposal from Dave to cap our total spending for Middlesex retirement and OPEB, which would reduce the liability there to by about $129,000 in next year's budget. So these were the 5 levers in terms of reducing the budget. We definitely know we need to have a conversation, particularly about the MCRS piece of this.
This summarizes what you just talked about for the case credit.
Yeah. So again, operating budget, 100,000, system-wide budget's 50,000. That's the same as was on the last slide. And we're just showing you the details of the case credit. That it's $500,000. We're looking at a 3-year plan. All right. Federal relief. Dave, do you want to say something on this slide?
Right. So our allocation, you see the bottom half of the slide, 418,000, and we're looking to use 100,000 of that in a similar manner in which we used the 115,000 of ESSER 1 last year. So we knew we had this allocation. We had 115,000 earmarked in the budget to buy Chromebooks for grade 9. We reduced the EdTech budget by that amount, and we bought the Chromebooks out of the ESSER grant. So we're looking, we don't have an identification of exactly what we'd use this 100,000 for, but it's the same thing. We'll reduce the EdTech budget by 100,000 and buy the stuff that was intended to be bought out of the budget with 100 of the ESSER 2 grant.
And Tessa, I see at least one person with a hand raised. Do you want to pause here? Or do you want to?
Yep, that's fine. Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a quick question about this ESSER 2 grant. It shows here it's FY21 through 23, which would be our current budget year through next year and the year after. And you're proposing using 100,000 of it in next year. So that means that the remainder would have to be applied to FY23. Is that correct? Or would you apply some of that somehow to this year?
So the rules, I'm sorry.
Give a quick overview on that, and then you can jump in.
Yeah.
So we're also in the process of finalizing summer programming for this year. We expect that to be a fairly substantial cost, probably about $100,000 total worth of summer programming to, for elementary through high school level. We also are looking at our pooled testing program. So that 100,000 looks good right there, but I anticipate that will, the use of that.
So there's some potential, I guess my question was, there's some potential use for it in this year, as well as what you're budgeting for next year and reserving for the third year of the program or of the grant.
Yeah, the pooled testing piece would be this year, and then we're looking at summer program and then the 100,000 from tech next year.
Angie?
Thanks, Tessa. So just to clarify, so this budget is based on the assumption we're going to do pool testing and the student will go back to school in fall and there's no remote.
So, yeah, so the what I would say is we have to have some preliminary assumptions about next year, even if we know they're possibly wrong. Just like last year, we had to at some point pass a budget based on some model. We have to do the same thing this year. And we know there's going to be adjustments. I am sure there's going to be some type of remote programming needed next year. At some level, there'll be something. We don't know what that looks like yet because we have no information from the state. The pandemic continues to change course. We have no information about vaccines for kids. So there's just a lot of unknowns. And so to try and guess at all of those right now, we think is premature. And so we just need to set a budget based on the in-person learning model. Okay. And then just like we did last year, be able to pivot from that and make adjustments.
Okay. I just want to know the base. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incomplete and I want to recognize that. But, if I had any good information to go on, I would, but there's nothing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. All right, so we'll continue on here. I can find the right screen to share. All right.
Yep.
So now, Dave, you're on.
Okay, so Peter gave a quick overview. I'll give a quick overview. The Middlesex County assessment increase for next year is about a 12% increase. There's an anomaly in how that was determined. It has to do with head count. It's way in the weeds. But the assessment, which we must pay, is up by 12%. OPEB, we have funded for several years now at $900,000. This is the payment to the OPEB trust. This is a voluntary payment that goes into a trust to pay for future health benefits. The increase year to year from 900 to 900 is zero. What I'm proposing is to cap the combined increase of the Middlesex County assessment plus the OPEB trust contribution at 5.5%. I'll tell you where I came up with 5.5%. But by doing so, it reduces the combined hit to the budget by $129,000. So let's go to the next page and we'll see the mathematics of the $129,000. So the Middlesex County assessment goes from $2.8 million to almost $3.2 million, or 12% increase. OPEB contribution flat at $900,000. Combined, you see the numbers: 3.7 and $4.080. If we cap the total of those two cost centers at 5.5%, that total is $3,951,000, or a reduction of $129,000. We'll see on the next slide. Don't go there yet. Of how the 129 impacts our long-term projections. One quick one is the footnote. Middlesex County projects that assessments should go up 6.5% through FY30, after which they'll go up 4% until full funding, which is now expected in FY37. It's at 12% actually because we employed bus drivers and made other new hires in FY19. And yes, the FY19 hires are just making themselves known in the actuarial calculation, which underpins the assessment. That's a long sentence, but just so you know, there's a basis for why I'm doing this, because I believe the FY22 assessment is an anomaly that won't be likely to repeated. And by combining the two, we'll have budget certainty, as you'll see in the next slide, and short term, meaning FY22, some savings to help us come in and lower the assessment to the member towns. So $129,000 savings in FY22. What happens with that? So if we look at the next slide, what I've done is, don't get frightened, I'll walk you through this. What I've done is to project this out through 2033, and so the MCRS column takes the assessment and increases it by 6.5% a year through 2030 and 4% a year thereafter. The total column, what I've done is applied a 5.5% increase to the total. So we skip over the OPEB column for a second and get to the total, because I know what the assessment is, because I know what this year's is, and I'm going to increase it by 6.5% and then 4%. Therefore, I know what the total will be, because again, we come up with a total for FY22 and grow that by a constant of 5.5% through this period of time. The plug is the OPEB contribution. So what it has typically been $900,000. That's where the savings comes from. And so what I'm proposing would reduce the OPEB trust contribution in FY22 by $129,000 or down to $771. It would go up slightly thereafter because it has to do with why I picked 5.5%. It results in some growth in that OPEB contribution, and ultimately, and notably, when the Middlesex County increase reverts to 4%, which is projected for FY30, then the OPEB contribution will go up significantly and make up the lost trust contributions, if you will, from the earlier years of this plan. It also should be known, although not shown here, that the Middlesex County retirement assessment could be less than 6.5%. It was several years ago, less than 6.5%. Why is that? Same thing, head count. If we have a strategy which reduces bus drivers, which we did this year, if the lower bus driver costs get themselves into a actuarial calculation, their assessment could come down. So again, not to get too far in the weeds, but the 6.5% is their target increased contribution. What I'm saying is to match that with a target of 5.5% for our district and tie in the OPEB contribution with the Middlesex County contribution. And you can see that by the end of this analysis, so through 2033, which is on the eve, 3 or 4 years away from when Middlesex County expects to be fully funded, by that point, the OPEB contribution, the OPEB trust will have been contributed to by $700,000 more than if we just went along with pay the assessment, pay the $900 to OPEB. That's a long time from now, and is probably going to be looked at with askance as far as how comfortable are we that in 11 years we can do that. But this is more or less to show you that this is not a one-off, 1 year, hey, we need to find some budget savings. Oh, I got it, let's do this. There is some intellectual basis and some thought behind coming up with a 1 year, something which manifests itself in a 1 year savings. So this is, Tessa thought, and I think rightly so, that you can possibly get your arms around this analysis or at least maybe have some questions that I could answer about it.
Well, I think Adam is going to ask the best clarifying question ever, right, Adam?
Yes. So I want to start with some comments and some overview with sort of explaining how I got my head wrapped around this, and then I'm going to lead that into a question, Dave. So first, MCRS is Middlesex County Retirement. So that is our retirement liability for all of the staff in the district. OPEB,
Stop, Adam, can I interrupt?
Please.
It's for the non-certified staff. Certified staff are in Middlesex, are in Mass teachers, and to which we do not contribute. These would be custodians and hourly personnel.
And then the OPEB, or other post-employment benefits, is essentially retiree health care.
Correct.
Correct. So the reason we draw these out is because we know we have these long-term liabilities based upon the staff that we employ in the district. So my question, Dave, my clarifying question is, why is it that for MCRS, we have to continue to pay 6% and then 4%, but for OPEB, we can pick how much we want to pay each year?
Including zero, which if you follow the OPEB presentation, many of our peers have not yet begun to fund their future OPEB liability. The direct answer to your question, that it's in the statute. Decades ago, the legislature passed a law that said you must fund your contributory retirement systems on an actuarial basis. And so Middlesex County Retirement System essentially sends us the bill and says, you must pay this.
But there is no such organizing body or statute that says we must fund our other post-employment benefits in a similar manner.
No, and if you want, one of the members asserted that I have a crystal ball. What I'm of the opinion of is that once the contributory retirement systems achieve full funding, which is projected to be in the middle of the next decade, so the mid-2030s, all of a sudden there is going to be significant amount of money comes off the table as far as what needs to be appropriated every year. A big chunk of the Middlesex County retirement assessment is to pay for actuarial liabilities of what's called past service costs. That's what's going to be fully funded. That's what's going to drop off the need to be funded via appropriation. And my bet is at that point, you'll see state law come in and do for OPEB what it did for county retirement systems. That just as a practical answer, how is the state going to come in now and mandate you need to fund your OPEB? But they did it for retirement systems, and cities and towns and districts have been doing so for 20, 30 years.
Thank you.
John, are you sort of raising your hand?
Yeah, thank you. The part about this that I do love is the part that these are long-term liabilities, and whenever we discuss things, it's good to put them in a common bucket. So putting the Middlesex retirement and OPEB, in one point of discussion, is a great thing to do. The second thing that I'll note, sort of to Peter's point at the top, is it's $100 million budget. So $1 million is 1%, and $100,000 is 0.1%. So, at some point, we're sort of getting a little bit into the weeds when we get down below 100,000, but this is a little bit above that. I think the other thing to this point about, the precision that can exist in a spreadsheet, we've just finished a discussion where we're trying to figure out what we're going to turn back at the end of this year, which has some uncertainty in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And yet, I look at the spreadsheet, which, projects many things out, with great, refinement for a long period of time. And I think, both, there are reasons to be skeptical both about the Middlesex projection. And I'm not saying that it couldn't be more favorable, or less favorable. I'm just saying that, is going to be different. And I'm particularly concerned about the OPEB projection because, it's grounded in our own healthcare cost experience, which I believe has been below market, and that's influencing where the projection is. And so by way of a specific comment, I think this is an interesting idea. My personal preference for this year would be if you want to pick up $129,000, take it from E&D, leave OPEB at 900.
Diane?
Yeah, thank you, John, for saying that. So I guess my question to Dave is, because you floated this idea of when we fully fund the liability for MCRS, we can then, have all this money to push it over to OPED and retire that liability a lot later than I think what was originally predicted by the actuarial report at 2097 or something crazy. So, it seems like a great plan, but so the actuarial assumptions, how much can you trust that? And what could throw a monkey wrench in this plan?
The monkey wrench in the plan would be if the retirement systems underperform their investment objectives. Okay, they don't earn as much as they think they're going to earn. We just got something that in the calendar year just ended. I'm going off the top of my head, but I think they earned 12% last year. Their actuarial number is 7.3. That's a monkey wrench, but that is a monkey wrench that fell on the accelerator pedal, and so it was a good thing. In returns aren't always going to be there, so that's one. You heard that I'm maintaining that the 12%, and I verified this with the executive director of Middlesex County. The 12% anomalous assessment is because we hired more people in 2019. To the extent we continue to hire non-certified staff and add to our headcount that are county retirement system eligible, the assessment will go up more than 6.5%. To the extent we reduce our hourly and non-certified staff, there should be at least a 1-year adjustment in that, and then it should resume once it normalizes. Once headcount normalizes, the increase is 6.5%. The only swing factor would be headcount. So there aren't a lot of levers to change that, which is why I kind of came up with this idea and said, I think there's probably where we are now. There's a pretty good feeling on my part that 6.5 is a good number that will not often be exceeded. Meaning, there should be opportunities to restore the OPEB contribution up to 900, up to its current level, and perhaps an increase in excess of its current level. But what I'm also doing is I'm anticipating the point at which the Middlesex County assessment goes from 6.5 to 4%. If we have the budget certainty of 5.5% increases for both of those line items, we will have the ability to achieve what some have wanted for a while, which is to put more money into the OPEB trust. All I'm saying by this analysis is it's going to take a few more years, because there are 6 or 7 years which right now are budgeted 6.5% increase.
So I guess my question is to John, why would you say just take it out of E&D? Keep us at 900, just for John Peterson.
Why would I say that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the use of E&D is transparent. It's clear that we are drawing down our reserves to deal with this. Dave commented that the Middlesex retirement, is a one-off to the extent that the spirit of, E&D usage relates to those one-off events. I would invoke that. In general, as we're going through this process, my desire would be to say, fine, if we need to maintain the budget at a certain level, then, we will draw down reserves and make it clear that that's the way that we're doing it, creating a problem that everybody will understand exactly what it is.
And
if
what
we put
about
a bunch of things through the budget, here and there and everywhere, then figuring out what we did and why we did it, it's going to be complicated.
But John, what about this is not transparent? Dave has made like an incredibly transparent graphic that shows exactly where the money is going and exactly what we're doing. So you cited that as a reason. That's the only reason I'm pushing back on you, because you said the use of E&D is transparent. To me, using E&D for something when there is a clear explanation of how we could be using it is less transparent.
Okay, so to respond to that, if I provide 100 transparent explanations, the sum of the 100 transparent explanations is not transparent. It's just confusing. And so I think, whether we're talking about revenue adjustments where, I would have been happy to say, hey, we've got a negative revenue variance. It's 262. Here are the things. I really don't care what's inside that. I don't think it impacts, our ability to manage the macro budget. I would rather see, fewer levers, that you say, okay, we're going to use these 3 levers and this is how we're going to get there, as opposed to, if you think about the slide that Peter just showed that said, I got this lever, this lever, this lever, this lever, that's not a conversation that everybody can hold in their head all the time as we're making a final decision about where we go. If the issue is, we're going to clean up the whole thing and we're going to take E&D from, some number to $450,000 more than that number, that's clear. The fact that it happened to be, 3 little events, somewhere buried in the line item of the budget, I think that's not so helpful to the school committee to be down in those kind of weeds.
Okay. Angie?
Yeah, thank you. So this maybe, so my understanding of this one, we're putting, with one side, we're required to put certain percentage into the fund, and the other that we're not, there's no set percentage we need to require, but regardless, both are for future funding. We're putting the future funding. And the performance, because it's a long term, so the rate of return, the performance on the fund that we put in will have a huge impact of result, 10, 20, 10 years later. So my question is, how would the performance of the money, are they managing the money that we're putting, and regardless, and maybe the 1 year they're outperformed, maybe the year out they're underperformed, and regardless that we are required to put that much, or is there any other impact on, I don't know how we are able to control, or knowing by the but by this long-term investment and knowing it will get the result that we expected.
Yeah, so by they, Angie, you mean Middlesex County Retirement System. So they're overseen by a similar group as Mass Teachers Retirement and the state retirement system itself. And they are professionally managed, and I mean I can't really comment on what they do, but I can tell you that for the most part, retirement systems in Massachusetts all pretty much track about the same, and that is that over a 30-plus year span, they've returned an average of 9%. Okay. Their assumptions were at 8% until a couple of years ago, when interest rates on and the ability to get returns that they were used to have gone down, and they've reduced their target rates of return down to 7 3/4, down to 7.5, and most recently for Middlesex County down to 7.3. That may not sound like a lot, but when you're talking 30, 40, 50 years of returns, that's a massive swing, potential swing. They've reduced their projected rates of return, meaning it's going to be harder to come to full funding, which is one of the reasons why their full funding estimate went from 2035 to 2037. Alas, we're now in the weeds. But it's professionally managed, Angie. We don't have control, but we have an obligation, and I think it's Chapter 32B of Mass General Laws. We are plain and simply required to make this contribution to our contributory system.
Okay, so in other words, regardless of the rate of return and the percentage that we are required to contribute, that will not be changed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now that we're thick in the weeds, are we ready to move on to the rest of your presentation?
Absolutely. Peter, if you can just refresh by going back, please, to slide 41. So Peter went through all these. These are the 5 identified budget adjustments. And we've where required, spent a little more time on a few. So now we want to resume on slide 47. So those were the budget changes. So as you remember from what Peter said, there's 2 ways to impact the assessment. One is budget adjustments, which we've just talked about. The second is reserves. And so what this recommended budget does is restore the use of E&D to the same level as FY21, or $1,145,000. And that results in $180,000 reduction in the assessment, but it didn't change the budget. So just by way of backup, here's since full regionalization, the ins and outs, if you will, of E&D. And so the pink number, we had said in the first iteration, we'd be using 965 to try and soften the use of E&D year to year and systematically reduce it. Now we're saying level fund it, $1,145,000. I've added to this, which may have looked familiar to some. I've added a column, net turnback / adjustment to E&D. That's the plug, because I know what the ending balance, I know what the beginning balance is, I know what's been transferred out, I know what's being used to fund the following year's budget, and so the difference is that column, and that represents the turnbacks, and it represents the DOR adjustments when they certify E&D. There's a mini trend from 2017 onward that the turnback has gone down. It's hard to focus on just that, though. It's hard to say that there's a trend. And in particular, FY21 is not going to follow any trend, because COVID is going to wreak havoc with our normal operating activities. So, and this is just how $1,145,000 usage fits in historically with the district's use of E&D.
And if I could just show one thing on this, these years right here in particular were important years. If you look at the percentages, we have a 5% cap on E&D, and we were getting very close to that. This right here was the feasibility study funding for the elementary school project that we have going. And then the following year, you can see this was when we established the capital stabilization fund. And so, you can see the turnbacks, and that was a very intentional move to bring this percentage down because we were at that cap. So as a function of total reserves, even though the E&D balance went from 4 million to 3.6 million, That was in addition to the million that we transferred over.
Correct.
John, do you have a question?
I do. So, I was really glad, Dave, that you included those turnbacks. And so, if you look at, those 2018 and 2019 extremely large turnback numbers, school committee sat, just as we are sitting now, and looked at budgets, made that E&D appropriation, and we could go back and watch the tape, but I'm guessing, there was not extensive discussion about how we expected to turn back, $1.5 million, which is material relative to our budget number. And I'm wondering how we should feel about that, as we look forward, to future budgeting, how we can have swings of this size that, are not a deep part of our budget discussion.
Big components in 17, 18, and 19 of that net turnback was revenue. My predecessor had not budgeted interest income or Medicaid reimbursement. She also very conservatively budgeted for Chapter 70. In 1 year, I believe she budgeted level funded Chapter 70, and the district received minimum aid. That's a big amount to the district right there. The interest income and Medicaid went from unbudgeted to, and I would say for years, the revenue budget, we're chasing our actual. And we this year, the dog caught the car, because Medicaid rules have changed. The reimbursement's not as robust as it's been. Interest rates have plummeted, and we're not going to make the interest income that we made. So the revenue components of the turnback, John, were something that is not repeating itself now. And so there are three components to that turnback. There's revenue, there's expenses, and there's the DOR adjustments, the back and forth, the prepaids, the negative accounts, et cetera, which, as Tessa knows right now, we're in the weeds.
And I really don't want to be in the weeds when we have this discussion, which is why I requested that we talk about it the way we have been talking about it. So I think that, John, there's lots of complicating factors from those 3 years and the discussions that school committee was having. You may recall that we were in like major, superintendent flux at the time. So there was lots of things going on then. I don't know that we would want to go back and look at the tapes and talk about, the turnbacks, because it's just so much more complicated than just a number. I think that what that chart does show is that I know that Dave has made a concerted effort over the last couple of years to really hammer down what our revenues were going to be and to get much closer so that we didn't have this unwieldy number at the end of the year that wasn't expected. And I think that is what's reflected in that chart and what's important for us to take away from looking at that, because he has made a really concerted effort to really account for all of the things that we're adding to revenue. Adam?
Yeah, I would say that the other thing that chart shows is the work the district has done to build up its reserves since 2014, which is something that we really lauded as a really good thing. And John, I think in response to identifying all of those turnbacks, while we may not have seen them in the moment because we were clearly busy with a lot of things, we have in those ensuing years put in place better defined policy about how to manage those reserves, at least on the outbound side of spending them, even to the point of the capital stabilization fund and the policy for that as well. So I think that we're, hindsight being 2020, we did take a look at that situation and try to manage that both from our perspective as a policy side and from Dave's perspective from a budgeting side, to really say it's hard to turn the aircraft carrier, or what I remember the analogy, but something having to do with, it's $100 million budget, and if we come in at 1% plus or minus, we're doing a good job, and we've gotten much better to that than we have in the past, which I think is what's important to note there in terms of reserves.
Diane?
Yeah, quick second to that. And Adam, like when your first year here, Dave, you were like, just really, I was blown away by, just the attention that you gave to the percentage of, the variances and all the cost centers. And it really helped me understand, what was going on here. I have a couple of questions about E&D. I'm looking at the policy DK on our reserves. And the guidance is, and it's guidance, it's not hard and fast rule, that we want to keep a reserve level between 4 and 4.5% of operating expenses, and we're below that right now. Now we're going to use another $1,145,000 for FY22. So I just wanted to say that out loud. And then the other thing is, so I'd like some clarity on what are we level funding E&D for? Like we developed a policy, we have 5 targeted areas where we stated that we're going to use E&D for one-time expenses. So the 5 are phasing in new initiatives, capital expenses, expenses that will be reimbursed or funded through other sources in the future, emergencies, and perhaps this is what this is, or funding of the capital stabilization fund, which we did. Using E&D funds for these one-time expenses may result in lowering the budget and assessments to the member communities. So I guess I just need the breakdown. Like, is this we're just lowering the assessment, and this is an emergency, or is there like a breakdown? Because this is really the first year that I know it's, there's $200,000 that we always kind of put to lower the assessment, but for a couple of years now, it's been very targeted to buses and really one-time expenses. And then I'll just piggyback on that, we have agenda item 3D, and we're looking at a potentially significant liability there with regard to EDCO. And I think that it's important for the committee to understand what might be happening. I don't know what the timeline of that is, if it's FY23, because it would inform our choices now, would inform my thinking now about using E&D if I knew that we had to earmark some of that for what might turn out to be a significant amount of money that we might owe. So that's a question for Peter. And then the last thing is, when you take out of E&D, the idea is to replenish it. And so, I pulled, one of the references in the policy is from the guidelines and advisory on fund balances from the Government Finance Officers Association. And, I don't have a financial background, so, I'm going to defer to the experts here. And what they say is that they recommend that, that governing bodies establish a formal policy. We did that. And that we set that policy and articulate a framework for how to increase or decrease the level of our fund balance. Okay, we did that, and then we should provide guidance in our policy for how resources will be directed to replenish those fund balances. And they recommend a timeline of between 1 and 3 years should the balance fall below the level that we prescribed, which is between 4 and 4.5%. So these are the things I'm thinking about. I know that's a lot, but I just would like some clarity on the 1.145 million and all of the other things that I said about the upcoming potential liability with regard to EDCO and replenishment. So I'm going to mute myself and hopefully get an answer.
I think from my standpoint, there was a break, and it probably occurred last year, because I'm looking at through 2019, and I probably could recite you all the pieces that comprise the use of E&D, whether it's, as you say, buses or buses again, etc. In 2020 and 2020, the 2020 budget fiscal year, where we appropriated $1,145,000 for the following year. So for this year, if you remember last year, the budget dragged on because of the pandemic, and we ended up not settling the scores until June with both towns. And to get there, the towns and the school departments together both had to reduce the impact on the two communities. And the way it was done was via E&D. The last bit of it was via E&D for the district. And so, in my view, from both the 1,145,000 numbers on that slide, on that chart, have lost their individual character where they had them before. And I think it's safe to say that two things. Number one, if you directed me to do it, if it was important for presentation purposes, we could define the use of E&D in the specific terms of the policy. But remember, as you said, the last one is to reduce the impact on member communities. And so that's where the body lies at this point. If we didn't need to reduce the assessment to the communities to a certain level, so as what Peter showed before, the first one out of the box was 4.5% and 6%. That's not going to fly. And so to get to where we are now, the last piece of it was, instead of reducing from the 1,145,000 that we appropriated for this year and trying to glide path it down to a more normal historical level, we said we've got it. It's in the bank. It's for a rainy day. It's, metaphorically speaking, raining. We're gonna use the same level of E&D reserve. I will also say one other thing. At the beginning of this presentation, one of the things Peter said is we're looking for direction. And so this is a proposal, but we obviously need your input and ultimately support for where it goes. And so this direction is a two-way street here.
So before I call on John, because I think that was a good description of what you said, I want to make sure that we are still staying on target of what you need from us. So we've heard a lot from, Diane understands budget really well. She ran the budget subcommittee and has asked really good target questions. John understands the budget well, and Adam understands the budget well. I want to make sure that the other members are understanding what is being asked. And if you don't understand what is being asked, now is the time to say that you don't understand what is being asked so that we can clarify, and so that Peter and Dave can get the information that they need in order to appropriately adjust whatever they're going to adjust for Thursday.
And just so you know, we've gone kind of out of order from a typical presentation where we go through the whole presentation, but a couple of our slides at the end have the specific questions that we're asking of you.
Well, and that's fine. So I wanted to make sure, though, because, sorry, but your questions tend to lead us to the weeds. And so I don't really want to let you ask another question if it's going to go there. Is it going to go into the weeds again, John?
I'm not sure it's always the question. Sometimes I think it's the answer. I do want to ask one, I think, sort of straightforward question, which could get a completely long answer, but I'll let you cut it off if you don't want to entertain it at this point. Dave just said that 4.6% assessment increase for Acton isn't acceptable. But, Acton doesn't spend the same amount of money per student as Sudbury does or Concord does. So what's wrong with letting it go up 4.6%? Why can't we do that?
So, John, we have a slide on that coming up, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good with that.
Angie, do you have a question now?
Maybe it's also because I think I asked a question at the sub. So basically, we're trying to make sure that we avoid the override. So, is there any percentage of increase that will be tipping over? That's kind of question.
So I think the questions I'm hearing now are kind of germane to like the next 9 slides. So I wonder if maybe we could do like the next chunk and then come to questions, because I think it would come together a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Amy,
Those
are you in
great
the
questions,
same boat?
but
Amy, are you in the same boat there? I know you had your hand up. Yeah, okay. Okay, go ahead, Peter.
all right. So just because we've gone in a couple different directions, just to recap where we're at so far. Thank you. All right. We talked about 2 major levers. One is reducing the budget. That's items 1 through 5. So, you know, if all of those, including the MCRS OPEB piece, which is a piece we need to talk about more, that would get us to about 550,000. If we level fund E&D usage, that gets us to about 723 total adjustments. That would bring the numbers that I led with at the beginning of the presentation. It brings us from a 3.73% increase down to a 3.17, or about $600,000 change. Notice again, this is highlighted, the E&D piece is highlighted here because it's an increase. We want to point that out. And the assessments come to 3.46 and 5.02 respectively. So again, headed in the right direction. Now, good news is over the weekend, this continued to evolve. Diane noticed in the line item budget that there was an unusual increase in assistants. She pointed that out. Marie was able to do further research. We realized that we had actually double counted all-day kindergarten assistants in the budget. So there's, once you take that out, there's a savings of $180,000. The health insurance trust rate, I mentioned this earlier, but that was voted at 7%, which is 2% higher than we anticipated. So that effectively cancels out the $180,000. In addition, though, we've now been able to look through all of the various leaves and retirements that have been committed to, and that's about $200,000 worth of savings. So we're just shy of an additional $200,000 worth of savings in that budget. And so when those come into play, the overall budget increase is 2.97, and note some of that's capital. So the operating budget is going up about 2.75, but the overall is just under 3. The Acton assessment is around 3.21, and the Boxborough assessment's 4.78. And that's where we're kind of at this point tonight, and we're looking for some feedback on some things that will help us continue to refine that. So, you know, where we need guidance and consensus, what is the target? And this goes to what Angie just asked, and point A goes to what John had just pointed out. Why are we having this discussion tonight? It's very important to understand that Acton is at the levy limit. It's not whether or not Acton wants to increase taxes or doesn't want to increase taxes. There is a hard cap on what the Acton taxes can go up without triggering an override status. This is not the economy to be doing that. So one thing we really would like to hear from the committee is, what do you feel the assessment target is, and what do you foresee as the budget target? Do you want to see us to continue to reduce the budget? What's the impact on assessment that we want to have? And that's guidance I think we need from the committee a little bit. There's no easy answer to that because the idea of hitting the levy limit is not just the school district budget. It also takes into account, you know, the town municipal side, projections around revenue. It takes into account municipal reserve usage. It takes into account municipal budget increase. We can't control all of those, but what we can control is our assessment and our budget. 2, use of reserves. What do you feel is the appropriate use of reserves in the level that you'd like to see out of us as a recommendation, and feedback on our proposed increase in the use of E&D. And then the third area are reductions to the budget. How do you feel about the MCRS OPEB contribution proposal that Dave floated? And, you know, any additional reductions to the budget really are coming out of staffing at this point. So, you know, we want to have that explicit conversation. Just as a sample, up above at the top, you know, $100,000 budget reduction is about 0.1% reduction to the budget increase. And $100,000 assessment reduction is about 1/13 of a percent reduction to the, or 0.13% reduction to the assessment. In terms of when we get into staffing, example one, just so you see how it goes, if we reduce the budget by $200,000 and increase the use of reserves by $150,000, we could actually get those numbers to what you show here. Another way to do that would be to reduce the budget by $350,000. The budget increase is lower, but the assessments are still the same. So the difference here is example one splits the changes between reducing the budget and increasing reserves. The other one decreases the budget, but doesn't change the use of reserves. We end at the same assessments. So there's different ways to get there. We just want to point that out as we have this next discussion. In terms of staffing implications, these are the same guiding questions that we asked where we need some feedback. But essentially, for every 2 staff, licensed staff that we reduce, that's about $120,000 reduction in the budget. And so when we come back over to this slide, when we talk about the $100,000 budget reduction, you're probably talking about roughly 2 staff. All right. Just as a couple notes, what we are not doing right now in this recommended budget, because we need to know your sense of numbers, this does not increase class size, so that's good. It does not have additional potential staffing reductions yet, because we want to get a sense of the target from you. It does not continue to defer capital appropriations. We bring that back in. Restoration of all-day K to previous level, that's not in the budget. We've kept it at the reduced level. It does not increase the use of reserves over our current level. It does not have potential for unidentified federal relief. So we may have additional federal relief coming that could further reduce some of the district's costs. And it also does not provide for continuing the remote learning program in FY22. And I alluded to that at the beginning, where there's so much unknown again about what next year looks like that we have to pick a starting point. And that starting point really needs to be what can we do, and what we can plan for right now is a return to in-person learning. I do anticipate there's going to have to be some form of remote, but we need more information before we know that. So again, next steps, it's actually not in the upcoming week. We need to get that feedback very quickly, because we need to turn around a recommended budget for a preliminary vote for Thursday. We will have our comprehensive budget presentation with kind of details on various things that we're doing. So if you say that you'd like, $300,000 of reductions tonight, for example, we would go back with our leadership team. We've started brainstorming ideas. We're not ready to share them yet around what type of reductions those might look like. But we would bring those back, in more detail on March 4th, and then leading to a final school committee vote. So that was Dave's person that has a question. But what we really need what I think we need as admin from you is, what's the target? What's the level of reserves you're comfortable with? And looking at, if we want to reduce the budget, looking at that MCRS OPEB proposal and any additional reductions beyond that. So those are our big points for tonight.
Marie?
I'm sorry, I just want to ask a quick question. Can you go back to where it is right now after the additional $200,000 reduction?
Slide 53. Yeah.
Okay, so the budget is at 2.97%.
Correct.
Yes.
So I think the examples on
the
slide.
The examples are old.
Yeah.
The examples, that slide was done before slide 53 was updated before the new information, which I got today. So
This slide
Right.
that you're looking at, 55, was done last Thursday. This came in this morning.
Yeah, I just think it's
There's a little bit out there.
people to know that this is where we are right now, which already does what those examples show for the most part.
Right. So if we reduce the budget another $200,000, then this number will come down, Dave, check my math, roughly 0.2%. So that would get us to just about 2.75.
well, if you look at go to the other slide, go to 55. So it says reduce budget by 200,000. Well, that's essentially what we did, and the budget increase is now 2.96 or thereabouts. And the Acton and Boxborough assessments are there, but the assessments aren't where they are because we did not also do another 150 of reserve.
Right, that's the one difference between Maria's right that the budget has
Right.
already reduced to those levels, but those take into consideration, or that A takes into consideration 150,000.
Yeah, that slide was intended to be illustrative and not, an iteration of where we stand.
All right, Amy, you're muted. No, it's still not working. All right, John.
Yeah, I think one thing that's come up a few times is this question of the remote learning program for next year. In my view, that is clearly a one-off. We don't expect to have a remote learning program in FY23. So that is explicitly addressed. I'd be very comfortable with the idea of saying we're going to budget, $775,000 or whatever the number is for the remote learning program, and that money will come from E&D. And that would be presented to the towns exactly as we presented the COVID circumstance this year. It's like, if we need a remote learning program, here it is. We're going to pay for it out of E&D, and then life goes on. So that's my sort of, I can try and be a little bit helpful. The other part of it is, the issue of, I don't think that FY23, in terms of the dynamics that have been discussed here, looks a bit different than FY22. So, I think people really need to see that, we're going to face exactly the same issue next year. What will limit the ability to increase the budget is the limitations on the rate of growth of the Acton assessment. And that means that that's what we're going to be facing in FY23. And that whatever we do in FY22, which should be reflecting the idea that that's sort of what we think FY23 will look like. And then the only thing, that I would leave, as a wild card, as I think has been presented, is surely we expect some more federal money and perhaps some more state money to show up. We don't know how much, we don't know when, but I think my willingness to be more aggressive with E&D is that one way or another, if those incremental funds show up, we will ultimately be able to allow them to flow to E&D if we get there. So, for my nickel, what has to happen at the moment is we need to get to an Acton assessment that takes us off, the growth rate that Acton's assessment has been at. So Acton's assessment over the last few years has been growing at a rate of 3.5%, which simply, once you get to the levy limit, that math is just not working. Even once you do overlay and new growth, it's like, no, you're not getting to 3.5%, and you're really not getting to 3.5% if the economy is not chugging along. So, I think for this year, if the Acton assessment is 3% or less, ultimately ALG will be able to figure out how to manage that. But if it's more than 3%, I just don't see how the numbers are going to work.
Amy, is it working now?
Yeah, I got it working. I'm using my husband's computer, and so it shuts down at weird times. So first, to clarify that the budget that is presented, Marie, that we have already completely eliminated the remote learning program and that staffing, and assumed that staffing has been absorbed, or so those adjustments have already been made.
Yeah, so Amy, we treated all of the remote learning program additional staffing as 1 year temporary staffing for this year. We can't say we're not going to have to do it next year, but if we do have to do it next year, we're truly hoping that there'll be more grant money to help pay for it, which is significantly how we paid for it this year, for the most part. So we sort of think if one thing happens, the other thing will also happen. So to John's point, I don't know that we'd ask the town to vote a much larger budget using E&D unless we knew we needed to, and you always could make the E&D adjustment as a budget amendment if you had to. But the hope would be that there'd be grant money for that.
Thanks. Thank you. I would say that I really, I completely agree with the OPEB analysis, but even in my mind, I would go lower than that, considering where we are right now. So we have 13%. We funded 13% of OPEB, and 90% of the other districts in the state of Massachusetts have done almost nothing. So I think we are already in a really good position. And when we're facing a crisis like this, I don't see, I think that that's a legitimate place to kind of look at. I'm looking at Dave's face and he's kind of, I don't know. Okay, but that's okay. So that's my opinion. I would also say, I know I can see Dave's face like, I don't know. I would also say that we should really look at the capital improvement plan that we have for next year, and the things where we can reduce to get to a place that Acton can afford without actually going in and reducing staff. Now, I say that with the understanding that we don't have fluff in staffing. So if we have staff that we don't really need, then yes, we should be doing that regardless of what our budget is. We should be tackling that. If we aren't there, I don't think that's the first place where we need to be looking at cuts. I think we have other areas that we should be looking at in this year. And if you can make an argument for why we should reduce staff because it's not really necessary, I'm fine with it. But if you can't, then I'm going to say, look, we need to look someplace else. So that's my opinion.
Adam?
So I think I'm saying essentially what Amy said as well, which is we face a number of challenges. I'm concerned about some of the long-term risk that's unknown. So particularly with what we're looking at for EDCO, I'm concerned that we are drawing down our reserves. And if I had to make the choice between 2 teachers or offsetting some of that expense against long-term liability, which is fairly well known, I would much prefer to take the hit on paying down some of our liability than essentially increasing our class size. Because the other challenge that we're facing is a year and a half of not necessarily learning loss, but definitely a different learning environment. And I think the last thing that we want to do is affect the district's outcomes. We are a premier district. We have one of the highest rated high schools in the district. And to John's point, we spend less per student than some of our comparable towns. So we're running a highly efficient education facility department. And I'm really proud of that. And the last thing I want to do is sort of cut ourselves off at the knees around the area that I think is most important that we take our pride in. I want to be fiscally responsible. And to that end, I want to both protect our reserves for future risk, but also want to find unique areas to save money. And I think that the reduction in payments to OPEB is a unique way to do that.
Kira?
This is my next stupid question. So if there are other districts that are not paying into OPEB, we are paying a lot into OPEB, what happens? Why is it that some people can get away with this and others cannot? And is there a penalty or some sort of other negative thing that can happen to us if we choose not to pay in for a year while we deal with the crisis at hand?
Not a stupid question.
Can I give a couple of facets and try to be quick? The penalty isn't so much a negative, it's the positive you wouldn't have gotten. So last year, we issued $80-something million worth of bonds that had a AAA rating and got tremendously low interest rate. And one of the, I discussed with the ratings analyst, and one of the things that was really to our credit was our OPEB funding policy. And it's really arcane stuff, but when it comes to is this community a AA or a AAA or the grades in between, you need some things that stand out. And so when you hear that we're at 13% funded and many other communities are not, well, that's, in my view, one of the things that pushes us over the top and gets us a AAA rate and a 2% bond interest rate for 30 years paying for the new school project. I will also say that having done this in this industry for a lot of years, the easiest thing to do when faced with the need to economize, and the choice is, do we lay off teaching staff or do we do something else? The easiest thing to do is the something else. And those things can be capital improvements. We did that last year. We zeroed out new spending on capital improvements. OPEB. It's one thing to make the proposal that I did that has a rational basis for making a one-year reduction because of the size of the Middlesex County increase this year, but then it trickles back. It's by no means saying, well, we can just walk away from OPEB, but we can take an OPEB holiday. I would strongly urge against that because you're where you are, because you had the fortitude to get to an annual funding contribution rate of $900,000. Don't discount how important that will be for future tax-paying generations in the community. And in other things that, there aren't a lot of other things, but that's the low-hanging fruit when it comes to stuff that's not teachers in the classroom, but it has longer-term implications. If we went another year without adding to the capital appropriation ability, the district will find itself back in position where it was a few years before I came here, where you were spending $100,000 a year on capital, and that's why we needed a $7.5 million bond and a 13-year plan to spend 20-something million dollars on capital, not even counting the new twin school. So there are trade-offs, but hopefully that answers your question, Kara, as to why you wouldn't just simply look at the OPEB money and say, well, that's so far out, we can tap that. The problem will be you tap it this year, and then you'll get into a habit, and before long, you'll be down to funding OPEB at 100,000 or zero, and just saying that liability is too far in the future for me to care about.
Diane?
Yeah, this is what I wanted to say along the lines of what Dave just said. first of all, I would like to see the percentage increase 3% or below. I'm going to offer a cautionary, note regarding OPEB and cutting CIP. This is the classic kind of, it's, of course, you don't want to cut your greatest asset, right? But this is a classic kick the can down the road thing and let someone else worry about it thing. And this is us saying, maintaining our buildings is a nice to have and only in years when we can afford to do it. And members, if you look in the archives, when we were not fully regionalized, and there was a school committee for the Acton Public Schools, and this is back in like the mid 2000s or something. You will see school committee members unsuccessfully fighting to increase the capital spending for our elementary schools, and where that got us is a $23 million punch list and $117 million new triple school. So I think you never really build that back into the budget, and I think we need to protect the plan because there's just too many. There's always going to be competing needs. So I don't want to cut personnel. I mean, Peter, you had some pretty creative ideas about managing and restructuring personnel so that you lower your costs, but you're still maintaining services. So I don't know, is there any room for some creative thought along those lines? I'm nervous about cutting E&D like this, and we need to do it, but then there's next year, and I mean there's a lot to think about, and I guess I don't think we can. I don't think you can. I don't want to send you back to ALG and say 3.21 and that's all we got, because I think we need to come in lower than that for Acton at least, because we're in that precarious position.
So Diane, just to quickly respond to that, we have been talking about some ideas around shifting some resources around and things like that. It's not ready for presentation yet, but we have been having some of those dialogues. And that's something that we foresee really kind of being on the March presentation, but. I think from a this year perspective, so far when we've started the budget process, since I've been here, it's been with, a good amount of new revenue. And so we've always been starting from a position of strength there. I think the discussion of this particular budget almost needs to start with the assessment increase. And to be honest, I've heard, basically staying under 3% on the assessment increase. And I don't want to misspeak, but I think that's doable coming into the next iteration of this, without damaging our programs and without, doing a lot of serious damage to what we're doing. I think we have some tightening up that we need to do over the next few days, but my gut is telling me that coming in under 3% on the Acton assessment, we can get there. And that reduces Boxborough too, which is a good thing, but obviously the Acton piece is the levy limit component of it.
John?
So, I really would just want to sort of reinforce what I think I heard Dave say and Diane say that, it's easy to walk away from the long-term commitments that, committees need to make to things like capital projects. And, to the committee's credit over the last few years, the committee did build the reserves, right? There was the opportunity, to take money associated with savings from regionalization and revenue favorability and use that to build reserves. And the committee did in fact do that. And that was a good thing to do. Likewise, to establish the capital plan, and do it was a good thing to do. And the committee now has a track record of funding OPEB to the tune of $900,000 a year, and that's an easy thing to do. The other thing that Dave has said, more than once, is that things are really different now. And I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that what the committee has faced over the last few years just hasn't been this kind of budget challenge. And so if people are feeling pain that they're not used to feeling, I think it's completely understandable because, and Peter just said it, we've had, more revenue favorability. We haven't had this kind of challenge, but that's where we are now. So I don't forget for a second that our social emotional needs, are larger than they've ever been, and that there's lots of things that we hope to catch up on, over the next year that would benefit from more resources. I absolutely get that. But when I look and say, well, where's that money going to come from? There's just a problem. So at some point, like any family budget, it's like, this is the pot of money we've got. We got to figure out, how we can best use that money to provide, the outstanding educational services that everybody, continues to expect from the district.
Angie?
Yeah, thanks. So I agree that I think Acton, because the feedback I got, because this year the property tax bill comes in and a lot of families are screaming already. So I really think that be able to keep under the 3%, it is actually crucial for this year. And so I wanted one clarification, which is this is based on the enrollment assumption is that we're going to have a 3% increase. Is that what we are based on the assumption?
Enrollment?
Yeah. Is there any, because the reason I bring this up, because I see an article today, California, I see a like 5 times of increase of people not enrolled, the drop rate. So I was wondering if there has anything, what's our base of, kind of understand what is the base, that we assume the same number of students, right, everything, right?
So Angie, we use our enrollment projections to determine how many students and how many sections we need at every grade level.
Right, so
it's not a 10% increase, it's just what the enrollment projections showed, which is a slight decrease.
Okay, slight decrease. That's what I don't remember. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I didn't weigh in, but I think that, I think that our committee has worked really hard to kind of put some of these lanes in place to make sure that we are maintaining commitments to things like capital and things like our liability. And I have had to sit in the OPEB meetings listening to all of the things that we are doing right, and talking with the people who are in charge of investing that money and everything else. And it is important, and as Dave pointed out, it has contributed to the favorable ratings that we've had and the ability that we had to get the bonds, which are at a very low percentage. That said, we also have enormous educational needs the next year, in front of us. The social emotional piece, as John noted, is enormous. So I too would be very wary of any sort of decrease that would impact in any way our ability to manage that heading into next year. And I would be very much in favor of reducing E&D, or adding to, however you want to look at it, taking E&D money to reduce the assessment if the general Acton feeling is that we need to be at 3% or below in terms of their assessment. That's fine. I really would be wary of cutting any sort of educational positions, because if anything, I think we're going to need more than we have this year, and obviously we're not adding staff or anything like that. So you have been incredibly creative in the past in terms of the funding mechanisms you've used, and I think I think continue. Evelyn has her hand up, and then I'm wondering, do you feel like you have enough feedback of what you were looking for? I'll call on Evelyn.
I think, and I want to hear Evelyn too. I think this is very, very helpful because, we want to be creative, but we can only be creative by making sure we stay within, we need the boundaries first in this particular budget, and then we can figure out what do we do within that to make sure we're maximizing the impact.
I really don't have much. I guess some of my questions got asked by others and they got answered, but I do agree that we have to be cognizant, of the assessment limits for Acton, but also what I worry as I listen to folks talk about all this is we don't even know what the school year is going to be like next year and where all this COVID situation is going to take us. So in whatever decision we end up with, we have to keep that in mind whether I know that we're projecting all of this in hope that we may not have the remote school and whatever, but we really don't know where this whole new variants that are coming up is going to take us and how effective the vaccines are going to be or not be. So, I actually am just sitting on the fence. I don't even know how to think about this, just given all the uncertainty around the situation that we're dealing with right now.
I think we all feel that way to some degree with it, where we're sitting here going, okay, we really don't know what to plan for. But I think if we can accept the uncertainty, again, we're going to need this in a budget. We know that. We know something else is certain, that there is an upper limit to what we can and the community can handle. So if we can get to that initially, then we can accept the uncertainty that might lie below it and the need to be able to shift funds later. And look at other sources. John mentioned E&D as one possible funding source long term. I know we also have other liabilities out there, and we're going to talk about EDCO in a little bit, that we need to be cognizant of that. But then we're also, looking at potentially more federal stimulus, and we don't know what that's going to look like, but that's also an opportunity to think about offsetting whatever costs are coming in. So, I feel like, for the frustration of how many unknowns there are, I feel like a good number of them feel like they're likely to be close to offsetting each other in some ways. I look at, we have a potential EDCO liability, but I also just talked about a $500,000 case cumulative surplus return. It's a weird, unpredictable level of equilibrium that we seem to be hitting somehow.
Okay. So the next items underneath your budget presentation and discussion are a budget subcommittee update, which I'm not sure that we need to have.
Nope.
Okay, I didn't think so. We don't need to have a BLF update because I don't believe that BLF has met. And does there need to be an ALG update? Amy's shaking her head vigorously no. So, okay. Then I think that if you've gotten enough feedback, and I would say I think that this is one of the best budget discussions that we've had in terms of everyone participating, then I think that we can move on to the next item, which is the EDCO update. And I'm going to turn my video off.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that, I'm sorry, ALG is not meeting till this Thursday morning. Okay. So we'll have something.
We'll have the ALG update on Thursday night. That's fine.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. I'm not really leaving, but I have to step out for 1 second. So Peter, go ahead and do your thing.
Sure. There's a memo in your packet, and I tried to summarize the information that is publicly available. I know we met in executive session last meeting to talk about EDCO. That information is privileged, obviously, to executive session for the reasons stated on the agenda. But there is a wealth of public information that's available around EDCO, including in the memo. We had a series of discussions over the course of last spring. And to summarize that, if you recall, last year, EDCO had an audit report that raised substantial doubt about the organization's ability to continue. And that was actually the FY19 audit report, which we had received in December. Over the course of the spring, we had a number of districts, including, I think Lexington was first, pass a motion to withdraw from EDCO and also consider termination of the organization. We had multiple presentations and discussions about EDCO and its financial status over the course of the spring, which ultimately we ended up deciding to reaffirm our commitment to EDCO The executive director at the time, who's since left the organization, had a plan to try and recover from some of the financial challenges EDCO had. I can say that the pandemic almost entirely stopped any progress that EDCO could have made, and certainly exacerbated the financial challenges that EDCO was already seeing. Dave and I, have both looked at EDCO's finances and where we're at right now. The greatest challenge that we see is we just can't see a clear path to recovery for that organization. In our ideal world, there would be some path to recovery for the organization, which could then reduce our longer term liabilities. But every time we go in, there's a greater liability than the previous time we learned something about EDCO. And so, it has a tremendous history as an organization. It has done some remarkable and wonderful professional development over its time. It has supported roundtables for school committee members, for superintendents, for assistant superintendents, curriculum staff. The IDEAS program is tremendous at EDCO. EDCO has also supported some remarkable programming for students with disabilities, in particular its deaf and hard of hearing program that was based out of Newton. They also serve as a grant channel for, quite a few DESE operations. But the financial picture of EDCO is just so bleak right now that, I guess at this point, my recommendation is that, it really can't continue as an organization and be financially solvent. I think the concern I have is that the longer the organization goes on and carries on in a way that isn't turning around, the greater the risk of liability to AB. And so my recommendation to the school committee tonight, unfortunately, and I want to emphasize unfortunately, is that, we would vote to initiate termination proceedings for EDCO. That would trigger, some board actions at the EDCO level. And then in addition, I think the committee probably, could consider a motion to withdraw from EDCO at the end of next fiscal year, because that's the process. I actually would also recommend that the committee take that action. I can't speak for other school committees and other superintendents. I know that there are a number of committees considering similar actions to this. We were going to have a vote on this last Thursday. Based on that information, I provided a copy of my memo to you, to all of the other EDCO districts. So they had a copy of it and they knew what was happening, and I've communicated with superintendents along the way. There is an EDCO meeting tentatively scheduled for Wednesday of this week for the board, because they know we're considering this motion tonight. And if you vote for this to initiate termination proceedings with EDCO, then on Wednesday morning, the board would actually consider that and consider whether or not the board was initiating termination proceedings. I have to believe it's likely that could take place, although I have not spoken with people, but I do know, all of the EDCO board members sit in the same meetings where we hear about the financial picture. We all, have grown increasingly concerned about that. So that's the update I have for you. I will say, to initiate termination proceedings is not a fast process. It would actually take an entire fiscal year after this year. So, should we should you vote to request initiating termination proceedings, that would then have to go to the EDCO board. The EDCO board would have to vote to initiate termination proceedings. Then I believe that has to go back to the other member districts as well, and then for their school committees. And then it would take a full year after that in order to actually close out the organization. So we're really talking about, the 1st of July for FY23 would be when that organization finally would disband. We don't know the exact liabilities that we could face in terms of that. There's a lot of legal questions out there. And the reason that it takes the entire fiscal year is because there's an accounting that's guided by DESE and kind of external organizations and entities to close down a collaborative. And until you go through that, you don't have a true sense of what the liabilities are. My guess is, depending on any legal analysis, it could be between, a total of $250,000 all the way up to $750,000 on the very high side was the highest of the estimates we've seen. I don't take that lightly, which I think was, speaking to Diane's concern previously. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Withdrawal from the collaborative similarly takes an additional fiscal year. So if we vote to withdraw now, we would submit that to EDCO, and that would become effective at the end of FY22. So again, July 1st of FY23 is really the date of that. That would protect, say EDCO continues as an organization beyond that, and we're unsure of their financial viability, we would still own the liabilities from when we were a member district, but we would not own future liabilities after that. So that's kind of just a safety net in case EDCO does not choose to terminate. I hope that provides, a good general overview. It's pretty much what was in the memo, but I just wanted to talk that through for you. And I think the motions were included in the packet, and I did have Colby double check the motions just to make sure from a legal perspective they met the requirement. If you do vote for termination and or withdrawal, Beth is actually going to be recording that vote tonight. And we're going to put that into a memo, and that memo will get sent off either immediately following the meeting or first thing in the morning to all the EDCO board members in their districts so that they have that in advance. But they're all anticipating that we're considering this tonight.
Amy?
I was just going to say, my understanding of what's going on and the history, I completely agree with you, Peter. I really, I'm sad to say it, but I do think that we need to withdraw from EDCO. We need to terminate our relationship. So I'm not going to make the motion. I can later, but I know other people want to talk. So, but that's my feeling.
Diane?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask how many students we currently have there, how many students we currently send there in a typical year, and what's going to happen to those students.
Yeah, so from an EDCO perspective, we have one student currently placed in any EDCO programs. That student's a senior this year and scheduled to graduate at the end of this current year. I don't know that this is accurate to date, but I actually believe one of the last conversations I had now with Debbie about out-of-district placements, I don't know as though we've placed any students out of district this year. So that's, we have no one on the docket for EDCO.
John?
But I think I'm so sorry, Tessa.
That's okay.
Question. One of the reasons, I think it's important, I think all of the board of directors doesn't want to have to think about terminating EDCO, but I think the reason that I feel like it's urgent that some committee make a movement in this is if EDCO is going to terminate, there's probably looking at ceasing a lot of its operations at the end of this year as a possibility. And we need to allow all of those districts time to place students in appropriate programs. And by doing it early and notifying districts early, we're giving people more time to make sure kids have good educational placements moving forward and are not kind of left on the hook. So it's an unfortunate move, but I do think it's important to do it sooner than later.
John?
I move to request that the EDCO board initiate termination proceedings pursuant to Article 9 of the EDCO Articles of Agreement.
Second.
May I speak to the motion?
Sure.
I just want to thank Peter for his leadership. This is one of these things that's really hard. I'm sure lots of people are sitting there saying, we know this needs to be done, but just not willing to move forward. And I particularly appreciate that you're moving forward, not only because it's something that needs to be done, but to do it in a way where the timing helps, optimize outcomes for students. It's just a great thing. I understand it's completely painful, but this is very good work.
Does anyone else have a question or a comment before we vote? There's like a mosquito in my ear. Okay. Then we'll vote. John?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes, and this is very sad to see a 50-year organization. It's heartbreaking to see this happen, but yes, I vote yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
And myself, yes. All right, that is unanimous. John?
And just considering the second possibility of also looking at withdrawal.
Yeah, I was just going to say, John, did you want to make another motion?
Well, if I'm on a roll, I move that the district will provide written notice to the EDCO board of the Acton Boxborough Regional School District's intention to withdraw from the EDCO Collaborative effective July 1st, 2022, pursuant to Article 10 of the EDCO Articles of Agreement.
Second.
Second.
Is there any additional questions or comments? Good. All right, John?
Yes.
I'm not kidding. There's really a mosquito in my room. I don't know how there's a mosquito, but there is. Amy?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Gibbon?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
And myself, yes. All right, that also passes unanimously.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Next up, we have subcommittee and member reports, and John has graciously agreed to move capital improvement and health insurance updates until next time, and to have those as an FYI. So policy.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm looking for see if Kirsten is here, but I don't see her here. So, okay, so in your packet you have two policies. Both are first reads. The first policy is EFD, meal charging. Kirsten Nelson is our food services director. She approached the policy subcommittee requesting that we codify in policy what really has been the practice in AB now for several years. The policy articulates our dual commitment to prioritize the well-being of students by providing healthy meals every day, regardless of ability to pay, so students can focus on their schoolwork, while also encoding fiscally sound procedures and practices around collecting outstanding balances for school meals. And those are in the EDFR. And for those of you who don't know, any policy with an R after it means it's a procedure. And that is not our purview. That is the purview of the administration. We write the policy, they write the procedures. And then just to be clear, and this is something Kirsten mentioned to us, that these procedures are not going to take effect until the fall. Meals are free right now for all students this year until June 30th, 2021, because the U.S. Department of Agriculture granted 2 waivers now. So that's a good thing. Anybody have any questions? I'm happy to take questions. This is a first read, so I'd ask you, well, Tessa, you didn't put this on the calendar for 2 days from now, did you? Or 3 days from now?
I'm not even sure. I can't even remember.
Okay.
Honestly, what the agenda, I don't think it is.
Okay, because we're not meeting until like the 12th. So
we're going to suggest waiting until the next meeting.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we took it off the agenda for
Okay.
Thursday.
Great. Okay. So I'm happy to take any comments now or questions now. You can also email me, just as long as you do it before our next meeting on the 12th.
So I think, John, I see that you're raising your hand, but just as we've done in the past, if you have, comments that you really want to put forward, then send them to Diane. If you have questions that would help clarify your understanding, now is the time to ask. Oh, John, you're not raising your hand. Okay.
Okay.
Adam is though. Go ahead.
I have just one quick question. And it's around the language in the third paragraph that says the district will provide meals to students who forget their lunch money or have a negative balance in their account. Was there discussion amongst the committee around saying something to the effect that a student would not be denied? I know they're kind of saying the same thing, But I guess for me, the language of saying that no student would be denied a meal feels more affirmative than we'll provide a meal to students who lose their money or have negative balance.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to GBAA. This is also a new policy, commitment to an inclusive and representative district workforce. I just want to say that this is likely the most vetted, carefully vetted policy that has ever moved through this district. It came before this committee probably a year ago and has since undergone revisions based on feedback from the DEI subgroups under Marie's purview and Dawn's purview, and the policy sub, it's come to us, I think, twice or 3 times now. Since then, there's been a local election with new school committee members on this, taking their seats at this table. So even though we've seen this policy before last year, we're just kind of wiping the slate clean, and we're considering this a first read tonight. So the vetting process for GBAA was driven by the imperatives of community buy-in, accountability, transparency, inclusivity, and a vigilance to having many voices shaping it. And I want to recognize Dawn Bentley and Marie Altieri for their work on this policy. If you're on this table long enough, you know that the superintendents over the years have commented to us that the quality work doesn't happen without a team of dedicated and deeply committed leaders who are mostly out of the public view, kind of quietly doing their thing, and all the things that have to happen to get the work done. And this is just true in spades for. I mean, this is just like on steroids for this policy. This is a historic policy, I think, for us. So I have kind of a little speech that I wrote because I feel like this is such a moment for us. But I did want to offer Marie and Dawn. I didn't know if you want to jump in and just talk about the process or the policy. It's fine if you don't. Don't mean to put you on the spot, but I wanted to give you a chance to say something if you wanted to.
I think you covered it, Diane. I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Is Dawn here as well?
I am, and I agree with Marie. Thank you, Diane.
Okay.
It's been a labor of love.
And it shows, for sure. So here's my speech. In 2019, as part of a school committee discussion on the long-range strategic plan for this district, Peter presented to us a graphic representation of the long-range strategic plan, which essentially was a roadmap of our goals from 2019 through 2025. The graphic is a Venn diagram with 4 giant overlapping circles. On the periphery of the circles, we see in bold our overarching goals and values. Engaged learning is in like a greenish bluish circle, and then you have equitable opportunities and outcomes in a pink circle. On the other side, you have inclusive practices in a yellow circle, and then on the bottom part, you have the social and emotional well-being in a kind of a bluish purplish circle. And interspersed are all these aspirational items like school culture and responsive instructional practices and key indicators, some of which are made actionable each year in the superintendent's goals. But smack dab in the middle of this Venn diagram, this is the center of the diagram of all of these ideals and ideas. At the very core of all of this work is printed the words educator recruitment, learning, and growth. And this is what lies at the very heart of our entire long-range strategic plan. It makes everything else possible: educator recruitment, learning, and growth. So GBAA's articulation of our commitment to diversity in our workforce will touch every strategic initiative on that graph. That's what I see when I look at that. I hope that the policy subcommittee won't mind if I say that we consider this policy a direct action to encode a better future for our district and our communities, but especially for our students, teachers, and staff. It is a continuation of the work we started on October 15th when we voted to retire the mascot. This doesn't diminish the mascot in the eyes of those who feel like it has value in their lives, but this is the work that we're doing, and this policy continues that work. So with that, I will take any reactions and questions to GBAA. I hear none. If you want,
nope. Amy's got her hand up.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I just want to say thank you, Diane. That was very well. That was beautifully spoken. Thank you so much. I completely agree.
Thank you, Amy.
Angie?
So, sorry, we voting tonight or we're not?
Nope.
No.
Just a first read.
Okay.
For questions and comments.
Okay.
Okay, I'm happy to take any comments you have as you reflect on this policy. Our next meeting again is scheduled for Friday the 12th at 8:30 a.m.
And so if you have questions or comments, you can send those directly to Diane. You don't need to copy me. You certainly don't need to copy anyone else on the committee. And Diane, I would just really congratulate you on bringing something for us. You know, the 3 years that I have sat on the committee, I guess this is my fourth, I did sit on the policy subcommittee, and as interesting as I thought it was going to be, we didn't really touch. A lot of policy subcommittee is continuously updating policies that exist already and updating language and making sure it's still in line with our goals and things like that. And this is really sort of revolutionary and getting and really moving forward some of the things and initiatives that we've decided as a school committee are important to us. And so bringing forth a policy, a brand new policy that reflects those goals that we have all stated are important to us is really wonderful. So thank you for taking on the hard work of chairing the policy subcommittee this year and making sure that something like this made it through. This has been a lot of work, as you stated. I mean, this did come to us a year ago, so certainly a lot of people contributed to that work, including everybody that is sitting on the policy subcommittee. But making that work really move forward is important. So thank you.
I would just say thank you as well. This was an important policy for us to have in place. And I really appreciate all the work and time and effort that went into this. And, you know, I look forward to getting feedback in and being able to move this forward.
Excellent work. Okay, so we're going to move John's things. All right, the statement of warrants. Does anyone have it open? I can find it in my bag.
I can do it.
Yay!
I move that the school committee vote to approve payroll warrant as follows. Number P2116 dated 1/28/2021 in the amount of $2,687,703.58. Payroll deduction warrant as follows. Number 21-016PR dated 1/28/2021 in the amount of $1,107,488.75. And vendor warrant as follows. Number 21-015 dated 1/21/2021 in the amount of $4,024,597.27.
Second.
All right, Angie.
Yes.
Amy.
Yes.
Adam.
Yes.
Diane.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Kira.
Yes. Yes.
Evelyn.
Yes.
Great. And myself. Yes, that is unanimous. Thank you. We're at the end. So, Peter, is there anything that you wanted to highlight in the FYI? I know I wanted to say to anyone who's watching on YouTube that if you would like to participate in a way that you get to ask questions or comment during public participation time or anytime during the meeting, then you need to pre-register, which the link is on the agenda for the next meeting, I believe. And that has to be done within 24 hours so that all of the cross-checking and making sure you are who you are can happen before you attend the meeting. And as always, everyone is welcome to attend via YouTube. And if you want to send in a comment, I don't see any reason why we can't continue that process as well if we want to read those at the beginning. But if you would like to physically participate in the meeting, it is imperative that you pre-register 24 hours before the meeting on Thursday.
And the only thing I will just add, it's more of a reminder from the beginning of the meeting that we do have our 3 high school principal finalists coming in tomorrow night. So that starts at 7 o'clock. So we have 7, 7:30, and 8 o'clock are the 3 presentations and opportunities to ask questions. And, we're sending that out to families for feedback through a form and asking any school committee members to email that directly to me.
And Diane, did you have something to share? You're muted.
Sorry. Okay. I just wanted to quickly share that I attended an MASC Division I workshop called Navigating a Mascot Change. It was on the 25th and they recorded it. And I just want to encourage everybody to watch it because it's about how Walpole and Medfield retired the Walpole Rebels and the Medfield Warriors. And it's a real education about how thoughtful and their process was and how they engaged their community and brought them along. I mean, there's lessons learned in there, and it's always painful, but I think it's a really valuable workshop, and they recorded it, which I was very excited about. So I would encourage everybody to watch it. It teaches you a lot about process and about how hard this has been through for every school committee in every district that has gone through this change. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. All right. Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
So moved. Oh, sorry, Kira.
Kira got it.
Yay, Kira!
I'll second Kira's motion.
All right, Amy, are you seconding that?
No, Adam got me before that, but
yeah,
it's okay.
Diane? Yes. Amy?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Don?
Yes.
Kira?
Yes.
Evelyn?
Yes.
And myself, yes. Thank you, everyone. And we will see you